He's reportedly pitching new jobs for Canada. That offer depends on Ottawa sticking to its plan to buy Lockheed's F-35 fighter jet.
What if I told you that one of America's closest allies is stepping away from its most advanced fighter jet, and Washington did not see it coming? Canada has flown alongside the US for decades. Shared air defense, shared wars, and shared secrets.
F-35 fighter jet says he looks to build new security relationships that are outside of our relationship with the US.
Yet today, that relationship is showing clear cracks. Tensions over tariffs, trade pressure, and sharp political comments have slowly changed how Ottawa looks at its southern neighbour. Now, a decision that was once seen as locked in is suddenly back on the table, and it could reshape North American air defence for decades. Why would Canada walk away from the F-35? And why is Sweden's Gripen now part of the conversation? Is this about money, politics, control, or something deeper? Stay tuned as we break down the growing Canada-US defence rift, compare the F-35 and Gripen head-to-head, and explain what this choice really means for Canada, the US, and the future of Allied air power. Washington woke up to a headline that felt less like routine procurement news and more like a bracing strategic surprise. Ottawa is seriously moving away from a US-built fighter fleet and talking about buying Sweden's Gripen instead of completing the previously announced plan to acquire Lockheed Martin's F-35. That single shift, from a programme Ottawa officially confirmed in 2023 to a talk of licensed Gripen production and deep industrial ties with Sweden, reads like more than a hardware call. It is a political signal, an industrial bet, and it lands on a backdrop of frayed Canada-US relations that have been building for years. To understand why this matters, you need the whole package: the politics, the money, the industrial promises, and the practical trade-offs between two very different combat aircraft. Start with the politics. The bilateral temperature has not been constant. Trade wars, tit-for-tat tariffs, and abrasive rhetoric from Washington sank into public view in 2018, and then again more intensely under the more recent administration's tariff moves and repeated taunts about Canada's sovereignty and independence. Those moves were not abstract. They meant real economic pressure, and immediate policy responses from Ottawa, and a widening sense in some circles in Canada that relying almost entirely on American military suppliers left Canada vulnerable to political leverage. In short, procurement decisions that used to be framed mainly as capability and interoperability choices are now being read through a political and industrial security lens. Reuters and other outlets tracked those tariff battles closely as they erupted and escalated, and several developments in 2025 made that history relevant again. That political context is why the Gripen offer became more than a technical alternative. When Saab opened formal talks with Canadian industry and Ottawa, including discussions with Bombardier on licensed assembly and local production, it came with a specific, tangible pitch: build in Canada, create thousands of jobs, anchor supply chains inside the country, and reduce dependence on a single foreign supplier for sustainment and upgrades. Reuters reported the talks, and the figure being floated for potential jobs, roughly 10,000, was a loud part of Saab's pitch. For an economy that depends on aerospace work, and for a government under pressure to show industrial returns on major purchases, those numbers matter politically and economically. But Canada did not leap to Gripen from nowhere. The government's fighter plan itself has a long backstory. Ottawa's Future Fighter Capability Project formally set out to replace the aging CF-18 Hornets with 88 advanced fighters. On January 9, 2023, the government announced it would procure the F-35A variant, and that commitment included an initial tranche of aircraft, with deliveries scheduled to start in 2026. The declared acquisition size, 88 jets, is consistent across government documents and programme announcements, and the programme was presented as the most significant Royal Canadian Air Force investment in decades. That decision reflected long-standing interoperability thinking. Canada, as a NORAD and NATO member, values platforms that plug directly into Allied sensor and command networks. So how did Canada get from a confirmed F-35 choice to a real public reconsideration? Two things happened in parallel, and they reinforce each other. First, politics. Tariff fights. Repeated signals that political relations with Washington could be transactional and unpredictable. And a series of public comments from US leaders that rubbed Ottawa the wrong way. Second, industrial strategy. Ottawa is increasingly vocal about wanting more domestic jobs, and domestic maintenance capability for major military buys. The Gripen sale, on the table with Swedish commitments for local production and offset packages, directly answers that industrial policy objective. When a government is weighing long-term sovereignty and resilience, especially in the Arctic, where Canada sees rising strategic competition, getting aircraft built and supported inside Canada looks different from signing a full purchase contract for an American platform, where much of the sustainment and high-end software remains tied to US systems. Both angles feed into the political momentum to pause and review. Politico and other outlets chronicled Ottawa's pivot toward Nordic partners and an Arctic-focused defence posture that made those industrial links more attractive. That said, the hardware decision is not just an industrial or political symbol. It is a technical one with clear trade-offs. Put plainly, the F-35 is a fifth-generation stealth multi-role fighter built around sensor fusion and low observability. The Gripen E/F is a modern fourth-generation plus fighter, much improved over older Gripens, designed to be agile, affordable to buy and sustain, and easy to operate from dispersed bases. Which plane is better depends on the mission set, budget constraints, and the political or industrial priorities you bring to the table. The F-35 wins, on paper and in many independent assessments, at stealth, deep sensor fusion, and long-term upgrade path as a core allied platform. Gripen wins on initial purchase price, straightforward sustainment, and the ability to supply and upgrade components domestically under the terms Saab proposes. Both claims are backed by figures and program documents. The US program's public flyaway figures for recent production lots put the F-35A in roughly the low to mid $80 million range per aircraft, while Saab and industry analyses commonly cite Gripen E unit prices in the ballpark of $80 to $90 million, with a lower sustainment baseline and a simpler logistics tail. But those headline prices obscure lifecycle support, infrastructure and weapons certification, training pipelines, and the cost of integration into NORAD and NATO operations. Dig deeper into cost and the picture becomes more nuanced, even messy. The F-35 program's economic footprint is enormous, not only the flyaway price of each jet, but also the sustainment obligations. US and independent watchdogs have tracked the program's life of program sustainment costs in the hundreds of billions. Congressional and GAO-CBO analyses show sustainment is the lion's share of the program's projected expense over decades. That matters because Ottawa must budget not just acquisition checks, but the long tail, spare parts, depot maintenance, software upgrades, mission data loads, training, and infrastructure. At the same time, many of the F-35's higher-level costs come alongside capabilities that Gripen cannot match: integrated sensor fusion, advanced electronic warfare and data links, and an upgrade path that keeps the aircraft aligned with US and allied developments. Canada's procurement documents from 2023 acknowledge that trade-off. The F-35 was selected on the basis of capability and interoperability needs, even if the life cycle bill would be heavy. Gripen's cost story is more complicated than the simple, cheaper plane line suggests. Saab and advocates for the Gripen emphasize low operating cost and more flexible sustainment. The Gripen has been designed to operate in austere, dispersed conditions and to be maintained with a smaller logistics footprint. Saab and some analysts have cited remarkably low per-hour figures. Other independent analyses produce higher per-hour numbers once the full maintenance picture is included. Aviation Week and other outlets have dug into those claims and produced mid-range operating cost estimates for Gripen E that are higher than the lowest Saab figures, but still generally lower than many published estimates for the F-35's per-flight hour costs. In short, Gripen typically promises lower daily operating bills and a cleaner industrial partnership for Canada, while the F-35 promises stealth, unmatched sensor fusion, and a direct plug into the US maintenance and upgrade pipeline. For a country that shares vast Arctic airspace with a near-peer competitor and that needs to reassure allies while maintaining national control of systems, this is not a purely technical call, it is strategic. Another dimension everyone mentions in public debate is sovereign control of software and parts. A common fear in some Canadian circles, and a loud political talking point, is that buying a US fifth-generation jet risks giving the United States a degree of operational control over the aircraft through software, export restrictions, or denial of certain upgrades. That idea has a powerful emotional pull because military sovereignty and the ability to operate independently in a crisis are core national values. But it is also important to separate myth from reality. Multiple defense outlets and the Pentagon itself have pushed back on the most sensational versions of a kill switch that would let the US remotely turn Allied F-35s off. The program does include tightly controlled software and data procedures for good reasons. National security, classified mission data loads, and integrated Allied operations. And setting up, certifying, and servicing F-35 software does require close cooperation with US program offices. In other words, there are real constraints and dependencies to manage, but the wholesale narrative that buying F-35s means forfeiting sovereignty is an exaggeration. Partner nations operate these aircraft under governance arrangements, not under direct remote control. Breaking Defense, The Aviationist, and other specialist sites documented both the concerns and the clarifications from program authorities in public reporting. Then come the operational realities for Canada's geography. Canada is the second largest country by landmass, with an Arctic that is vast, sparsely populated, and increasingly contested. The RCAF's missions include continental air sovereignty, NORAD duties, quick intercepts over long ranges, and expeditionary deployments with NATO. All of those needs interact with aircraft range, payload, basing flexibility, and logistics. Some of Canada's own defence leaders have warned that a mixed fleet, say a handful of F-35s mixed with Gripens, would complicate logistics and training and could dilute operational readiness. The F-35's stealth and long-range sensor suite is attractive for denial and high-end deterrence in an era of advanced air defences. Gripen's strengths lie in distributed operations, low-cost patrols, and easier sustainment from regional hubs. Critics of the Gripen want Canada to avoid any solution that reduces the potency of its NORAD contribution. Supporters say a domestically built Gripen fleet would give Canada more control and a more resilient supply chain in a crisis. Both sides use the same set of facts, but weight them differently. Money drives a lot of this debate. Ottawa's recent budget choices show Canada is serious about closing a capability and spending gap. The 2025 budget spelled out stepped increases in defence investment and set long-range targets for bringing spending closer to NATO expectations. In that context, the difference between a fully supported F-35 fleet and a domestically built Gripen force is measured not only in per-plane prices, but in infrastructure, training costs, and long-term sustainment. Canada's publicly stated plan to purchase 88 fighters and the reported $19 billion tranche for initial purchases have to be squared with life cycle projections that some analyses put far higher. Those life cycle estimates are the real yardstick for a defence minister balancing procurement against hospitals, roads, and other voters' priorities. Budget documents and programme analyses make that tension explicit. They are what drives a government to ask whether a cheaper, domestically tied aircraft could achieve the same national goals for less political and industrial risk. There is a geopolitical calculation beyond pure dollars. Canada's movement towards Sweden and other Nordic partners signals a diversification strategy by building stronger defence industry ties with Sweden, Finland, and the EU more broadly, and by participating in joint industrial or financing mechanisms. Ottawa reduces some of the single supplier risks that were highlighted during tariff fights. The recent story about Canada joining a European-led safe fund and negotiating with Sweden on industrial cooperation shows the same logic in action. Diversify suppliers, anchor production locally, and get access to financing that does not come with the same political strings as some bilateral arms sales. That move also reflects a broader Canadian policy decision to lean into Arctic partnerships with other northern states that have first-hand experience operating in polar conditions. A practical and political alignment that changes the procurement calculus in ways that go beyond plane-for-plane specs. A P and Politico pieces covered those diplomatic moves and how they fit into Ottawa's recalibrated defence strategy. Let's compare specifics. Canada's formal plan aimed at 88 fighters. The most recent public documents confirm that baseline and the staged delivery plan that would bring aircraft into service, starting in the mid-2020s. The F-35A's recent flyaway numbers for production lots cited by programme authorities are roughly in the low to mid $80 million range per aircraft, while robust life cycle estimates push total per aircraft programme costs significantly higher after sustainment is included. Saab's Gripen E has been priced by some public sources at roughly $80 to $85 million per aircraft for initial buys, and Saab's industrial pitches include the possibility of licensed production with Canadian contractors. For operating costs, estimates vary widely and are sensitive to accounting choices. Some public assessments put the F-35's direct operating cost per flight hour in the tens of thousands of dollars. Estimates like $40,000 per flight hour are widely cited, while Gripen's proponents point to much lower advertised figures or mid-range independent estimates that still show a notable operating cost advantage. The realistic truth, national accounting methods and assumptions about hours flown, mission mix and maintenance depth make per-hour comparisons noisy. You must look beyond the headline number to the assumptions behind it. People matter in this debate, not just politicians, but defence chiefs, program directors, and industrial leaders. On the Canadian side, the procurement and defence leadership have repeatedly stressed operational requirements tied to NORAD and NATO. On the US side, Lockheed Martin and Pentagon program managers emphasise interoperability and long-term alliance cohesion. On the Swedish side, Saab's CEO and industry reps highlight the job creation and technology transfer opportunities. All of those actors produce different public narratives. Political leaders add spice, some in Ottawa see a domestic industry win and a political statement of independence. Some in Washington see a potential weakening of alliance standardization, and some defense experts warn that a mixed or lower stealth fleet could complicate deterrence calculations in a peer threat scenario. Reporting has captured all these voices, and the result is a cacophony that leaves the public and many policymakers asking, what does Canada really need versus what does it want to signal? There's also a forward-looking technical debate that is easy to miss when the headlines focus on nationalism and jobs. Aircraft design choices have long life cycles. Canada will operate whatever fighters it buys for 30 or more years. That means Canada must judge not only the platform's current capabilities, but also their upgrade paths, sensor suites, electronic warfare, networking, and how well each platform will age in a world where sensors, AI, and networking increasingly determine combat outcomes. The F-35 was built from the ground up around sensor fusion and linked networks. Its upgrade path is largely aligned with US doctrine and is driven at scale by the massive US defense market. The Gripen E is modular and designed for cost-effective upgrades and has a credible path for incremental capability improvements, but it will not be developed with the same scale of Allied investment as the F-35. That means Canada faces a question about the kind of air force it wants in 2040 and 2050, one that is tightly integrated into the US-led sensor and data architecture, or one that is more independent and sustainable on domestic terms. Both choices have strategic consequences. No serious assessment ignores the interoperability argument. Canada operates within NORAD and NATO, where integrated planes, shared mission data, and common supply chains make allied operations easier and cheaper. The F-35's case as an interoperability anchor is strong. Partner nations operating the aircraft gain access to shared training, consolidated logistics, and a common digital backbone. Gripen can be made interoperable, and Sweden's diplomatic work to integrate its aircraft into allied operations has accelerated in recent years. But it does require extra bilateral and multilateral work to reach the same level of seamless cooperation the F-35 network offers. If Canada weighs the risk of a future crisis where rapid allied integration matters, and many defence planners do, that tilts the analysis back toward the F-35 narrative. But if Ottawa prioritises local production and sovereignty, then Gripen's offer is a cleaner industrial story. The tension between these two rationales lies at the heart of the present debate. Let's get practical about what good decision looks like for Canada. If Canada's top priorities are maximum combat capability in high-end fights, long-term alignment with US and allied sensor networks, and the simplest path to joint operations with the US, then the F-35 remains the stronger technical candidate. If Canada prioritises industrial jobs, domestic sustainment control, lower operating costs in routine patrols, and reduced political vulnerability to export politics, then a Gripen deal with licensed production is attractive. In many ways, the best choice depends not on which jet is objectively better, that is a narrow framing, but on which strategy Ottawa chooses for defence, industry, and alliance posture over the next 30 years. Canada is not choosing a plane alone, it is choosing a position closer to the US combat architecture, or more diversified and domestically anchored. There is also a third practical option that many analysts mention, but politicians rarely shout about: a mixed fleet. Ottawa could accept a smaller tranche of F-35s to secure the interoperability backbone, while buying a large number of Gripens for routine patrols and dispersed Arctic missions. That would be a hedge, broad strategic capabilities from the F-35 plus domestic sustainment and lower-cost sortie generation from Gripen. But mixed fleets are expensive in training, logistics overhead, and sustainment complexity. Defence chiefs warn they can erode the very readiness the mixed approach seeks to preserve. A mix is only sensible if Ottawa is prepared to accept those extra overhead costs and to live with 2 training pipelines and 2 logistics chains. Those are real penalties that have to be plugged into the budget math. Now the politics again. Washington's reaction matters, because the United States is not only a customer, but a supplier and partner. If Ottawa walks away from the F-35 program entirely, it is almost certain to ruffle feathers in Washington. But whether that ruffling translates into concrete pressure, denied support, sanctions, or more tariffs, is an open question. In practice, the US needs a capable Canada in NORAD and values the operational cooperation. Washington has tools of influence, but it also has strategic reasons to avoid rupturing a long-standing continental defence posture. At the same time, the public mood in Canada, after recent tariff moves and provocative rhetoric, has hardened for some audiences. For them, buying Gripens is not only an industrial choice, but an assertion of national purpose. That political symbolism is part of why the Gripen option gained traction quickly. Reuters and other outlets covered both the industrial offers and the political fallout that made Ottawa's review more likely. So now the big question is this: is Canada making a smart long-term move, or is this a risky break from its closest military partner? Let me know what you think in the comments. Should Canada stick with the F-35, or is the Gripen the better fit for Canada's needs? If you found this breakdown useful, hit the like button, subscribe for more deep dives like this, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next.